Stojí, myslím si, alebo sedí pomerne dlhý večer. Začíname teda s miernym sklzom, ale máme program až do polnoci a myslím si, že v týchto, nechcem povedať rovno pohnutých dňoch, ale zložitých dňoch povolebných výsledkov, si myslím, že toto fórum je viac ako vhodné na to, aby sme si pripomenuli, čo sme zažili v minulosti a čo potenciálne môžeme zažiť znova. Ja osobne som veľmi nadšený, že sa nám podarilo zohnať na toto diskusné fórum tak kvalitných panelistov, ako budú v týchto dvoch paneloch. Ale prv, ako začneme, dovolte mi poďakovať mojim kolegyniam v nadácii Otvorenej spoločnosti za to, že sme sa tu mohli zísť, pani Marte Šimečkovej a Andrej Pukovej zo Stredoeurópskeho fóra, za to, že si teda dali túto prácu. Čiže ďakujem projektu Fórum a ďakujem Frontline Clubu za financie na tento večer. Tak nemám už taký silný hlas. A takisto našim mediálnym partnerom Film Europe, Media Company a Radio FM za to, že teda môžeme sa tu v takomto počte zísť. Ten prvý panel bude trvať teraz do takej približne 7, potom budeme mať 20 minútovú prestávku, druhý panel začína od 7 a večerné premietanie filmu Saulov syn bude nasledovať na záver tohto programu. Prvý panel si myslím, že veľmi súvisí s tým, čo sme tu zažili za posledný týždeň. Vidíme nárast pravicového extrémizmu nielen u nás, ale myslím, že sa to prenieslo aj do Spojených štátov. Výsledky volieb v Nemecku v troch krajinských regiónoch ukázali tiež veľký nárast. Čiže na jednej strane nemusíme sa cítiť osamelí v tom pocite akéhosi zarazenia, alebo povedal by som až beznádeje. Ale na druhej strane budeme musieť hľadať spoločné odpovede, ako z tohto marazmu von. V našom paneli vystúpia, v prvom paneli na tému strach v Strednej Európe vystúpia 4 panelisti a myslím si, že to je úžasná kombinácia ľudí s praktickou skúsenosťou z politiky aj z občianskeho aktivizmu a zároveň ľudí, ktorí majú hlboké umelecké cítenie a preto si myslím, že vedia cítiť veci hlbšie a dlhšie ako my ostatní, ktorým sa ako keby nové skutočnosti zjavia na poslednú chvíľu. Ak dovolíte, budem si ich volať postupne sem k sebe a diskusiu začneme po ich príchode. Takže dovoľte, aby som privítal ako prvú jedinú dámu nášho večera teraz, pani Vieru Dubačovú. Môžeš to, hej, nech sa páči. Pani Dubačová je čerstvá poslankyňa Slovenskej národnej rady, z čoho sa ja veľmi teším, vzhľadom na to, že tých žien v parlamente nemáme až tak veľa a ženský element a ženský princíp si myslím, že by nám prospel vo veľa väčšej miere a vo veľa vyšších percentách. Pre mnohých z vás ju asi nemusím predstavovať. Je to zakladateľka divadla z Pasáže, občiansky aktivista, politik a človek, ktorý už pred rokmi varoval pred tým, že čo sa na nás rúti, nás neminie, pokiaľ s tým niečo robiť nebudeme. Čiže s Vierkou sa budeme venovať tejto téme. Potom by som si dovolil pozvať v abecednom poradí teraz už pána László Rajka. Pán Rajk je architekt, režisér, človek, ktorý má podobnú minulosť ako mnohí naši slovenskí a českí disidenti. Momentálne je tu v niekoľkých, alebo už mnohých klobúkov. Ten, pre ktorý sme ho poznali, je, že je scenografom filmu Saulov syn a zároveň je vytrvalým bojovníkom za slobodu slova a vôbec slobodu prejavu v Maďarsku. Čiže človek, ktorý napriek tomu, že nie je profesionálny politik alebo profesionálny disident, venuje sa práve otázkam slobody v Maďarsku aj prostredníctvom, povedal by som, umeleckej výpovede. Takže veľmi sa teším, že mohol medzi nás prísť. Vítajte. Anton Šechovcov, náš ďalší panelista z Legatum Inštitútu, je senior, je vedecký pracovník. Vítaj. Antona asi budem predstavovať len pre tých, ktorí sa nezaujímajú až tak hlbšie o akademický výskum. Anton pracuje na oblasti teda vlastne pravicového extrémizmu v Európe. Nedávno v januári mu vyšla knižka, ktorá sa venuje neliberálnym demokraciám v našom regióne a dá nám taký ten akademickejší pohľad na situáciu. To znamená, to, čo sa nám javí, akože preboha, odkiaľ to prišlo, tak Anton má na to zdôvodnenie hlbšie ako len to naše preboha. A nakoniec, teda v tomto abecednom poradí vítam hostia asi z najvzdialenejšieho, teda jeho pôvodom z najvzdialenejšieho miesta, ale človeka, ktorý pôsobí v Budapešti, Nicka Thorpa. Nick pôsobí ako novinár v Budapešti pre BBC, ale zároveň je aj autorom knihy Od Čierneho mora k Čiernemu lesu, Cesta po Dunaji. A ak dovolíte, privítam aj jeho syna Jacka, ktorý je tu asi dnes najmladší účastník. Jack, welcome. Takže veľmi sa teším, že aj najmladšia generácia je tu s nami. A ja by som si dovolil, chceli sme organizovať ten večer, že začneme takými 8 až 10 minútovými vstupmi našich panelistov k situácii, ktorá sa týka práve nárastu pravicového extrémizmu v našom regióne, a teda vrátane Slovenska. Ale ja by som si dovolil možno začať s takým tým romantickým úvodom práve názvu tej knihy Nicka Thorpa, ktorá vyšla v roku 2013 a zaradil sa do radu spisovateľov ako pán Magri, ktorý tiež napísal knihu o Dunaji. A táto rieka, teda, ktorá ide od Čierneho mora k Čiernemu lesu. Nick, myslíš si, že tá čierna farba je naozaj emblematická pre náš región, alebo je to skôr ten modrý Dunaj a jeho farba, teda farba mieru a možno aj teda nejakej takej modrej obohy. Čiže vidíš náš región skôr v čiernych farbách, alebo skôr v tých modrých. Takže s týmto by sme začali a nech sa páči, Nick.
Do I need to stand? No, it's okay to sit down, isn't it? Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Jan, for that introduction. Blue or black? As I travelled the Danube to write this particular book, I was one of the first questions I asked everyone is what colour they see the river. I had white in Bulgaria in particular, yellow in the delta, black during the night, silver in Serbia. Politically, as that's the subject of this evening, I don't see this region, which I've been covering now as a reporter for 30 years, in two black terms. Whatever the developments in recent elections, whatever the fear generated or whipped up by politicians in different countries, whatever the genuine fears that people feel at this time, I noticed this evening's, the title of this evening's talk was The Triumph of Fear. I wouldn't quite go that far. I think there's a lot of fear about. I don't think fear has triumphed yet. Just before I became a journalist, I was fortunate to meet a Greek film director called Alexis Damianos, who'd fought in the partisans in the Second World War on the island of Crete. And his advice to me before I came to this region was never collaborate with fear, which I've been kind of chewing on ever since. And it's as true probably today as it was in the last years of communism in this region. I see a lot of fear, as I said, in the region. I see a lot of indifference as well. And I think indifference is sometimes even more dangerous than fear, because at least one can see, if one's afraid, one can see what one is afraid of, and I think indifference is often a big problem, whether at election time or at other times. I see fear among the Roma and among minorities of the far right. I also see fear in small villages in Slovakia or Hungary or elsewhere where the Roma are in the majority and where old ladies are afraid of having their chickens or whatever taken from their yards. I see also in the subject this evening, I saw this issue of what do the far-right groups have in common. I think the beauty of the far-right, if I can use the word beauty, is they don't often, is often that far-right groups in different countries, extreme nationalist groups in different countries, are by nature against one another. And that's a certain weakness which I think the extreme left never had in the days of internationalism. So the parties are against one another. And I think they're a great, one's job as a journalist is, I think, to look at the differences between people, whether they're people that one personally likes or personally dislikes. The fear generated across this region and across Western Europe of the migrants last year, I felt was largely because people didn't know who was coming. And it was the job of journalists like me to be on the front lines, on the different borders down through the Balkans, meet people, find out their names, find out their ages, where did you come from, how long are you planning to stay, do you ever plan to go home, what do you hope for from us Europeans, and so on. And I think the same questions can be put today to people who vote for far-right parties, but also people who join far-right parties, to the leaders of far-right parties. One finds, for example, if one probes these parties, for example, Jobbik in Hungary, the far-right party I'm most familiar with, happens to be the only, I think, far-right party in Europe which is largely pro-Muslim. It would take a whole evening to explain why. Their website is called Kuruc.info, and the Kurucs were a band of Hungarian bandits fighting against the Austrian Habsburgs, largely. So they were Protestants fighting from bases on the Islamic side, on the Ottoman side in Hungarian history, fighting against the Habsburgs. So there is this long tradition of the far right, or this particular Jobbik party, being relatively friendly to Islam, and that's why they haven't managed to capitalize, unlike other far-right parties right across Europe today, on the refugee crisis today. A couple of other points, so I don't overtake the time that I have. It's I jump forward just to, I hope, as we were walking in here, and I had a brief conversation with Anton, and he'd said that he wasn't going to be talking about Ukraine or about far-right movements in Ukraine. But I just read on the train this morning on my way here a very interesting paper of his from a couple of years ago, looking at the role of the far-right in the Maidan, in the Ukrainian revolution, and I was struck and appreciated very much, Anton, your writings there to differentiate between different rightist groups and what those groups were doing in a revolution, and their activity in that revolution in the Maidan very much being used by opponents of Ukraine to slag that revolution, that uprising off, to pretend or to make out that it had been directed from the top. Reading your words, I was struck when I was in Bucharest in the autumn, at the time when Victor Ponta's government fell, largely as a result of the fire at the Collective nightclub and the failure of the politicians to prevent that, or of the corruption behind that. There I was struck by the sheer diversity of the people on the street which brought down the Ponta government. Again, like in the Maidan, like in Ukraine, people coming out onto the street to fight against corruption. And I think this is one of the strange, as I don't know so much about Slovakia nowadays, but I am aware that one of the things that voters for non-establishment parties like Kotleba's party were doing, fighting against or voting against corruption, often voting on corruption issues. They didn't seem to be so worried about the fascist element in parties like that. So it's another thing to be interesting to talk about this evening. That was a brief race through one final point in this introduction, just to mention on the 24th of March, so later this month, the verdict will finally be announced in Radovan Karadzic's trial. I knew Radovan Karadzic fairly well before the war, and he was probably the person, the politician I've met in my life who was nearest to what I understand as a fascist. Someone who threatened in the Bosnian parliament people of another faith or culture, the Muslims of Bosnia, with genocide, even on the benches of the parliament. So it'll be interesting to see how his verdict, what verdict he gets later this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Teraz by som vám dal trošku takého úľavy z tej angličtiny na úvod a prešiel by som k Vierke Dubačovej. Vierka, roky pracuješ na tejto problematike ľudí, ktorí strácajú svoj zmysel života a zrazu sa ocitnú, povedal by som, v nejakom objatí pravicového extrémizmu. Roky si upozorňoval na to, že to, čo sa deje v kraji Banskobystrickom, kde robíš aj poslankyňu Budsky, že na meste, že vlastne tá Banská Bystrica nie je anomália, ale že je to nejaký dlhší vplyv. Alebo že proste tento vývoj je tu už nejaký čas. NEC nám hovorí, že netreba sa báť, že ešte by sa nebál. Aký máš ty postoj k tomu, čo si za tie roky videl?
Dobrý večer, ďakujem za pozvanie na túto naozaj veľmi aktuálnu tému. Rada som prijala to pozvanie, veľmi ťažko sa mi začína, ako a odkiaľ, teraz som počúvala, je to naozaj veľmi ťažké, pretože keby ste ma pozvali pred 2 rokmi, keď nastúpil Marian Kotleba za župana Banskobystrického územného celku, tak by som asi začala od inakiaľ. Možno dnes začnem témou sme nedôslední. Všetci. Ja som sa chvíľu po revolúcii zamýšľala, ako sa vysporiadať s komunizmom. Ako preniesť deťom tému komunizmu a celého toho 40-ročného totalitného tej existencie v totalite. Až teraz vlastne sa začíname pomaly vysporiadavať ešte s témou slovenského štátu. A my nedôsledne ani neuzatvárame témy. Ak sa dnes rozprávame o extrémizme, tak naozaj sme sa posunuli za tie 2 roky. Ja som si tu aj našla, ak by ste sa chceli dozvedieť spätne, čo sa dialo v Banskobystrickej župe, tak my sme sa tam hneď stretli, aktivisti, Rado Sloboda, Inka Kosová, ľudia z Banskej Bystrice a začali sme teda sedieť a pracovať na tom, že čo sa tu teda deje, čo sa udialo, prečo sa to udialo, že ideme teda spätne hľadať odpovede a zároveň ideme odštokovať toho župana, ktorý sa tam teraz dostal do vrece zemiakov. A ideme o tom teda písať a informovať. Na zbystrujeme.sk to nájdete všetky tie články, veci, krok za krokom, ako sme to sledovali. To je jedna časť. Druhá taká veľmi pre mňa dôležitá vec je ísť priamo do regiónov, kde ľudia volia takýchto extrémistov. A to je taká ďalšia veľká vec. Tá sa týka Slovensko, odkiaľ pokiaľ je Slovensko prosperujúce a kde sa nachádza to Slovensko skutočné. Slovensko sú dve. Sú 2 regióny. Či sa to niekomu páči alebo nepáči. Je neuveriteľné, že politik príde z východu, z dediny, netvrdím, že tam pásom husy, ale v Bratislave zabudne, odkiaľ prišiel. No a teraz sa vrátim k tej nedôslednosti a k tomu, čo som rozprávala, že ešte nie sme vysporiadaní ani s takými tými zločinami komunizmu, ani s tými pozostatkami komunizmu a už sa tu máme vysporiadavať s niečím ďalším. Andrej Bán bol teraz v Krupine, hľadal regióny, kde vyhral Kotleba. Prečo? Je zvláštne a zrejme každý jeden z vás si spomenie na nejakého starého človeka, ktorý povie, za slovenského štátu bolo dobre. Ja som to osobne u nás v dedine zažívala ako malé dieťa. Ja sa vám priznám, ja som si sama musela niekde utriasť v sebe, čo to bol slovenský štát. Sama som si našla literatúru, čítala som si ju v 15, 16, ale aby mi to niekto vysvetlil doma, kde sa vlastne vôbec o ničom nerozprávalo, kde som raz povedala nejaký vtip na Lenina a 2 roky som sa bála vychádzať z domu, lebo ocko povedal, že nás teraz všetkých pozatvárajú. Takže pre istotu nás neinformovali ako deti o ničom. Niektorí sme mali šťastie, že sme mali starších súrodencov, tetí, strýkov a tí nás teda vzdelávali a dozdelávali, pretože škola túto funkciu neplnila v takom plnom rozsahu, čiže bolo to nedôsledné. Potom po revolúcii zase nedôsledne nevysporiadaní s predchádzajúcim režimom sa mladí ľudia ani nedozvedeli, netušia, čo sa udialo, už dneska ani nevedia, čo bolo v 68. No, po zvolení Mariana Kotlebu som sa dostala so študentami minimálne 20 škôl do kontaktu úzkeho. Vyhľadávala som ich, chodila som na debaty, hrávali sme predstavenia špeciálne k projektu cez divadlo Pôtoň a snažili sme sa vzdelávať a debatovať a hlavne aj sami sa vzdelávať, prečo sa to stalo. Ak by som len sedela a vravela, no tak tí ľudia toto zapríčinili, voliči nejakí, zvolili vrece zemiakov ako menšie zlo pred tým väčším zlom, aj keď dnes neviem, čo je väčšie zlo a menšie zlo. Ale v každom prípade sme sa stretli. Každý deň sme stretávali 40 ľudí. 40 dotazníkov vyplňalo týchto 40 ľudí, verte mi, vždy na 50% vyplňali, že vyvolili Mariana Kotlebu. Tie dotazníky máme k dispozícii. O tých dotazníkoch 2 roky informujeme.
Môžete skáčať do reči, to boli dotazníky zo škôl v Banskobystrickom kraji?
To boli dotazníky zo škôl v Banskobystrickom a Nitrianskom. My sme si zobrali po Mariači aj Nitriansky kraj, lebo zrejme poznáte situáciu, ktorá sa udiala v Nitre v kaviarni Mariači. Takže my sme si zvolili proste 20 škôl z 2 regiónov, a jedna škola prišla ešte z Bratislavy, tá sa sama prihlásila do tohto projektu. Myslím, že to bol projekt v rámci OSF, ktorý sa konal cez divadlo Pôtoň. No a popri tom sme ešte s Radom Slobodom aj cez Nie v našom meste a Nie v našom kraji chodili po školách, kde sme vedeli špeciálne, že vyhral u prvovoličov Marian Kotleba. Ja osobne som si sadala do aut a napríklad som stretla prvovoliča zo Zvolenskej školy, ktorý mi vysvetľoval, prečo volil Kotlebu a prečo sa mám ísť pozrieť do Veľkého Krtiša na sídlisko a rozprávať sa tam s mladými ľuďmi. Čiže snažili sme sa naozaj proste hľadať tie príčiny u tých mladých ľudí, u prvovoličov. No a vlastne jedno s druhým sme prišli k tej našej obrovskej nedôslednosti vo všetkom, vo vzdelávaní, v kultúre, zanedbaní vo vzdelávaní alebo v takom rodinnom vzdelávaní, v rodinnom prostredí. To nie je len zlyhanie škôl. Moja netier z Nitry mi vravela, Vieri, my sme mali úžasné šťastie, že sme mali ako dejepisárku učiteľku, ktorá nás celú triedu, dnes má 30 rokov, ktorá nás celú triedu zobrala do Osvienčimu a každú tému sme preberali. Takže dnes som si uvedomila po stretávke, že z našej triedy nikto nevolil Kotlebu, ale z vedlejšej bečky tam už bolo viacero voličov. Jedna učiteľka. Dôsledná a dobrá. Takže to sú proste kroky, ktoré sme takto sledovali. Hľadali sme tie témy, premietali sme si, s deckami sme sa rozprávali, kde žijú, v akom prostredí, čím sú obklopení, ako sa rozprávajú s rodičmi, ako sú informovaní od rodičov o tom, čo sa udialo treba za socializmu, čo to bol pre ich rodičov socializmus a čo znamenal pre starých rodičov slovenský štát, to sa potom prenesie aj na rodičov. A takýmto spôsobom po vyplnení tých dotazníkov sme ďalej pracovali celý deň, potom sme sa vlastne akoby poučali my z toho, ako zase na ďalšiu skupinu, ako prichádzať k ďalším informáciám a robili sme takéto mapovanie. čo bolo zaujímavé, bolo to, že v podstate nebol záujem o výsledky takéhoto projektu na Slovensku. A veľmi ťažko sa mi to teraz hovorí, pretože naozaj tá nedôslednosť, ja som bola zhrozená pred 2 rokmi, že ľudia nevedia, kto je to Ján Palach. Že študenti univerzity nemenovanej netušili, kto to bol Ján Palach. A ja som si vravela, no toto bude mať ešte katastrofické následky. A potom vlastne o 2 roky sa zvolí Kotleba a tí študenti vlastne dnes ani nevedia, čo sa udialo v druhej svetovej vojne, na akej strane bolo Slovensko, že Tiso nie je národný hrdina. Ako, naozaj to sú dosť katastrofické veci, ktoré sme sa dozvedali, máme to zmapované, vieme o tom rozprávať, vedeli by sme posúvať tie veci ďalej, vedeli by sme s tým pracovať. Len naozaj akoby nebol dopyt po tejto téme. A ja len dopoviem, čiže ako naozaj teraz si myslím, a ešte v kontexte celej tej Európy alebo toho, čo sa deje dnes, sme aj na hraniciach, pomáham na hraniciach, možno preto ešte pomáham tak nadšene na tých hraniciach, že som z toho regiónu Kotlebovho a cítim sama v sebe povinnosť týchto ľudí, mladých ľudí informovať o tom pravdivo, čo sa na tých hraniciach skutočne deje, akí ľudia tam prichádzajú, odkiaľ tí ľudia prichádzajú, prečo tam prichádzajú, byť s nimi v kontakte a nosiť príbehy tých ľudí, lebo zase ďalšia vec je, že tých analýza vecí a ako ten extrémizmus, ako ho eliminovať a čo, to je super. Ale Slovensko je naozaj krajina špecificky emotívna a tie príbehy sú veľmi zvláštne tých ľudí. Niektoré sú naozaj iracionálne. Ako ja vám poviem, z Poltára sú úplne iné príbehy mladých ľudí ako z Revúcej. Z Krupiny, Krupina je úplne iný región, ako keď idete ešte dolu, naozaj kde si pri Filiakovu. A toto je také zvláštne, že to Slovensko je malé, ľahko zmapovateľné a uchopiteľné a predsa také neuchopiteľné.
Čiže z tvojho pohľadu to historické nevedomie alebo bezvedomie mládeže nie je jedinou príčinou toho celého, že sa s nimi nikto nerozpráva v škole alebo doma, že keby si mala nejaké 2-3 príčiny povedať, že okrem toho historického nevedomia, čo ešte by si povedala, že je za tým všetkým, že prečo takáto...
Ja by som to ešte zobrala tak trošku aj s takým, akože ja som sa čudovala, ako môže komunista učiť na vysokej umeleckej škole. Prepáčte, teraz budem hovoriť veľmi otvorene. Ako môže tento súdruh učiť, čo ja viem, budúcich režisérov a hercov v Bystrici? Veď to bude mať následky. Ako sa tí ľudia budú vedieť postaviť k tejto minulosti tvárou tvára pravdivo? Ako budú vedieť reflektovať ako umelci? Alebo potom zase, prečo je v Nitre docent alebo učiteľ na univerzite, ktorý udal svojho kamaráta za to, že čítal 1984. A ten kamarát sedel v base a on dneska učí na univerzite. Môže takýto človek učiť ľudí na univerzite? Prečo sme nedôslední? Opäť opakujem, sme nedôslední. Prečo sme toto nechali? Prečo sme sa nečudovali, keď aj môj syn študoval a nemal poriadne dejiny a ja som hundrala doma? Ja sa hnevám aj na seba. Prečo som nechodila protestovať, že si želám, aby tie učebnice boli doplnené, aby sa môj syn naozaj v škole vzdelával? Čiže toto vidím ako obrovský problém a potom je to aj také naše, však my sme to všetci za socializmu mali, že proste neinformujeme tie deti. Bojíme sa dieťaťu povedať, že vieš čo, tak socializmus prežívala som v divadle, vážne, tak niekedy sme sedeli do rána v divadle a premýšľali, ako zakamuflovať jednu myšlienku, že chcem byť slobodná, no vyfajčili sme 3 krabičky cigariet, vypili sme 2 pivá, na tretie sme nemali. A proste, ako normálne sa rozprávať s tými deckami, veď aj my sme boli mladí, veď sme niečo cítili, niečo sme chápali, vnímali, zberali sme si samizdaty, rozprávali sme sa s nimi. My sa snažíme byť stále nejaký taký pekný. Taký nejaký, akože aj ty so však bol pán farár, tak asi sa ani nepatrí, veď koľko ľudí, keď som sa s nimi rozprávala, tak akože, no ale veď vieš, že čo by sa tu stalo, keby nebol.
Okay. Thank you. That leads me to you, Laszlo, since you can take off those. I'll continue in English for you. So Vera, as an artist and theater director, led us to the point of historical unconsciousness, that we don't work with the kids enough to understand what happened in the past, and therefore we don't prevent them from repeating the past. You have played an enormous role in Hungarian civic life, and with the new movie also, I think the whole world can come back to something which we try to deny here, even 7 years after. Nick was mentioning the fear, that he doesn't feel the fear is now overcoming us. After the Saturday's elections, I felt the fear crept in our souls, like, oh my gosh, something really terrible has happened. How do you see that in Hungary, and also in a wider world of current world affairs?
Thank you very much for your invitation, and good evening. I would like to tie together the 2 points of fear and lack of knowledge. And this would be probably another idea. However, it's a very narrow segment, but I think it's a very important segment, that we have misleading knowledge as well, not only lack of knowledge. And this misleading knowledge, partially we are responsible for that misleading image or nature, especially concerning authoritarianism or dictatorship. We all have somehow the image that dictatorships are kind of clockwork, which are functioning like a Schaffhausen or a Doxa or whatever, very reliable. However, we don't like those functioning, but we believe that they are well functioning and they are effective, and however we don't like, but somehow we coquetting a little bit with this nature of efficiency, and even if it's half dictatorship. The misleading knowledge is that dictatorships and authoritarian regimes are chaotic, and by their nature they are corrupt. Somehow we feel that, okay, in the other world, dictatorships like banana republics and all these things from the 60s in South America, yes, they are corrupt and they are chaotic and they are not functioning well, quote unquote. But ours in Europe, they are tough regimes and they are reliable. Again, I can't use any other word. But if you think about this image was drawn by us, by people who are active members of the culture, of art, etc. Somehow we see these dictatorships black and white, and we always talk about the well-functioning Stasi or the well-functioning KGB or the well-functioning whatever secret service. And somehow we never mentioned that Stasi was just bordelic. It just didn't work well. I know very well the Hungarian secret service. Of course, they harmed us, but they were as inefficient as the whole regime. And not to mention the corruption. Even in the Third Reich, if we go deep into it, that corruption is not only cash, corruption is also through social networks, through party networks, through all these things, and dictatorships are based on very personal, very political, very close circles, networks, and these networks are corrupted since everything is excluded. There are no normatives, there are no regulations. It just goes through this thing. So it's partially this kind of misleading image and nature is responsible that those who are seeking for some kind of security in this in this historical period, because we all know its uncertainty and this shaky structure of the European Union, plus the refugees arriving in Europe, it's a very messy situation. So I'm not wondering that people try to seek for some kind of security, and because of the fact that the lack of knowledge about dictators, the misleading nature of, and the presence of fear, it could happen. And I'm not telling that they are not responsible of their votes, but I think we have to think about our responsibility of drawing up this false idea about dictatorships.
Basically, in 1990, people who were born or who were born in 1990 are today 26 years old. That means this is the generation of people who are out of universities or basically working or getting married and having children. So they don't even remember the Iron Curtains, the fences and all that. So what you're saying is that the generation who actually went through the dictatorship should be more active in a way of reminding the younger generation that there are dangerous things happening right now, but it seems to me that it is our generation which somehow is looking for Messiah, someone who will put the dictatorship back on track and say, hey, this is such a messy thing that it's better if we go back to what we used to have. Like the prime minister here is deciding about fences. So for me, building a fence is the easiest thing in the world. Taking down the fence is much more complicated. While with the house, it's the opposite. Building a house takes a long time. Destroying the house is easy. But somehow this mentality of like, why don't we just build a fence around the country to protect us from what's happening outside there? That's what puzzles me.
What I'm trying to say that somehow we didn't analyze. Okay, let's forget dictators. Let's use law and order instead, and which is a dangerous phenomenon. And we are not aware of it. We are not aware of it that building a fence, it reinforces the corruption. It reinforces the chaos, what we experience now. And so instead of defending us, this kind of political actions are pushing us into a chaotic, uncertain, corrupted situation. And corruption doesn't stay out on the other side of the fence, it will come in. We all know that after a while, even if my prime minister deals with the refugees equally, working for, of course there are more equal refugees and less equal refugees, and we all know that those refugees are going to buy passes to get into the European land, etc., etc. So it's on the long run, it's not pushing down the chaos and the corruption, but it raises and it reinforces. And this is what we haven't told. This is what we haven't talked about concerning the Ancien regime in Eastern Central Europe, which was very corrupted and very chaotic. Instead, we were always emphasizing the dictatorial phenomena of it and not the chaotic. And somehow, of course, you know, everybody wants to be a hero. And if the hardship is overemphasized, that more a hero I am. And we were not joking about the corruptive nature and the chaotic nature of these regimes.
Thank you very much. I think we can now safely conclude the first round with Anton Shekovtsov, who I think has the real deeply researched opinion about what happens. His recent publication, which came out in January this year, says, is transition irreversible? Basically meaning, case for Central Europe, something about, are we on the way to success, or would your response today be, yes, it is reversible, or no, it isn't?
Hello. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak tonight. The paper that you mentioned is it's asking in question whether the democratic transition is reversible. So the post-socialist countries, the post-socialist societies that went through the transition in the 90s, can we reverse this trend and can we go back to what Prime Minister Viktor Orban said about illiberal democracy? That would probably not be the socialist regime, that would be something else, but it would still be illiberal. So can it happen? And my answer in the paper was that yes, it can happen. It's not necessarily it will happen, but there are some trends that clearly show that it is really, really possible. But tonight, Laszlo and Verka mentioned the politics of memory. How can memory shape the future, and how can memory help us to somehow not go back to illiberalism? I don't think it's that memory is so much important here. And of course, the elections last Saturday, or 2 weeks ago, right? They show us that something really, really strange going on in Slovakia, because it's not even the Slovak National Party, right? It's a party, Marian Kotleba's party, which is much more radical, much more extreme. But let's look at Germany and the local elections in Germany yesterday. The Alternative for Germany, which is a right-wing populist party, was quite successful in several regions, and you cannot say that there is a failure of politics of memory in Germany. Because of this long-time collective schuld, or this collective guilt, that is an integral part of the German education, you can't say that it failed, no. I think that it is something different. And what I would like to discuss briefly here is that we have two problems. One problem is a direct one. These are far-right parties, right-wing extreme parties. Another problem, which is very often overlooked, is if we're talking about those far-right parties as kind of low-profile populists who distinguish between so-called common people and the corrupt elites. It's the low-level populism. There is a high-level populism, which is represented by people like Viktor Orban, like Miloš Zeman in the Czech Republic, like Robert Fico in this country, Law and Justice in Poland. We have this top-level populism, which is about, they cannot really say that there are common people and then there are corrupt elites, because they are the elites. They cannot blame themselves for everything out there, for everything bad that is happening in their countries. They nationalize, they globalize this populism, saying that our country is a common country, or a common people, a common nation, and Brussels is the corrupt elites. So they globalize this populist rhetoric. And what it brings us to is that is the return of a nation-state ideology. Now, the nation-state ideology, ultranationalism, or some other synonyms we can mention here, this is what has happened, which is against all the logic of globalization. A return to a nation-state is impossible. It can only be possible through a great dramatic event that would not be, and that would destroy any European society. And not only because the level of xenophobia and racism would be so high that it would not be possible to live in this society, but also the European Union would cut the structural funds, and this country would go into a default. So, if a far-right party like Kotleba's, like take the most extreme example, would come into power, that would be the end of Slovakia, of its economic prosperity, relative economic prosperity. But what do when we have these two levels of populism, low profile, high profile populism, another problem that we face is that we have mainstreamization of the far right and the radicalization of the mainstream. when Jobbik in Hungary became so popular, Viktor Orban decided to play with this rhetoric, with the same rhetoric. Furthermore, according to, referring here to the research done by the Political Capital Institute, based in Budapest, they say that at least 10 original points in the program of Jobbik are now being implemented by Viktor Orban, who is officially not a far-right guy. He's a liberal politician, liberal Democrat, or whatever. But Fidesz is not a far-right party. It doesn't really matter whether we in the academia define Fidesz as a right-wing, center, or conservative party. They implement the points that the Jobbik, the far-right party, classical far-right party, had in their program. So we have this radicalization of usually center-right parties, but also center-left. They play with nationalism, they play with nationalist rhetoric, with racism and Islamophobia. But we have this another process, and I think Nick and I discussed it very briefly before the event, is that the far right are moving towards the center. We can see it in Germany, we can see it in France. France, Front National, the far-right party, the French far-right party, it's not, under Marine Le Pen, it's not what it used to be under Jean-Marie Le Pen. They wanted to moderate, they wanted to become more mainstream, to move towards the center, and this is one of their points of success. So what we have is also this, the far right moving towards the center, and the mainstream parties being radicalized. And this is a huge problem, and let me explain why. This is the failure of the mainstream to deal with the problems that societies in Central Europe and beyond, also in Western Europe, are facing. There are many problems, and it has become a consensus in my field of studies, which is right-wing extremism, that the problem with the right-wing extremists is not they're so strong, is that the center is so weak. Center-right, center-left parties sometimes become too similar. People don't distinguish between. And again, this low-profile populism tells these societies that this is all just the corrupt elite. Okay, but what is happening when a far-right party gains something in the electoral process? Some mainstream parties do the knee-jerk reaction. They think, okay, the society now wants the radicals, so let's be radical. And they create this atmosphere of spiral radicalization, when radicalism becomes a new normal. And this is a problem, because what it brings, it doesn't, I think many in the audience would agree with me that that one of the reasons why Marian Kotleba was so successful in the recent election in Slovakia is because of Robert Fico, who decided to play with Islamophobic rhetoric, decided to play with ultranationalism. But what it creates, and here's another problem, which is a long-term problem, the dissemination of nationalism and of conspiracy theories and this radical anti-globalist discourse, it creates a illiberal and civil society, which is politicians come and go, presidents come and go, parties may fail in the parliament, they could be away from the parliament in the next cycle, but the culture stays. And civil culture creates a very, very useful and very, very good grounds for a long-term illiberal trends, where illiberalism would become the new normal. And of course, I cannot fail to mention that these particular, the nation-state ideology, the low-profile and high-profile populism, these trends, these developments are now hailed and greeted by Putin's Russia, because they really want to see Europe to be divided, to the West being weakened, And also we can see here, and in this country, that Marian Kotleba is very much pro-Putin. One of the, I think one of the most popular or infamous conspiracy theory magazines, Zemavek, is very much pro-Russian and pro-Putin. They really like to meet the ambassador of the Russian Federation and ask money from Russia, go to Moscow for the same reason. Journalists sometimes exaggerate the problem of, and exaggerate the idea that Russia gives money, loads of money to all the far-right guys and far-left people. It's not working this way, but there is a very clear trend that Russia is interested, and Russia is really looking forward for the West to be disunited and for the European Union to be weakened as much as possible. And these guys in different countries, Jobbik in Hungary, Kotleba and the SNS here in Slovakia, Freedom Party of Austria in Austria, and Alternative for Germany, they are all being helped. And they have ceased to be a national problem, and I think this whole trend is a real danger to the European Union as such. Thank you.
Nick, you coming from the UK, there is a little bit of extremism happening also in the United Kingdom, but there is not such an extreme response to the refugee crisis, since UK has been a place of where millions of people came from various parts of the world. So I think this is one of the reasons why somehow you handle the situation better than the rest of Europe. I mean, we see the rise of nationalism, right-wing craziness in Denmark, in Sweden, in other countries. So Slovakia shouldn't feel lonely in that kind of trend. Is there any kind of advice which the UK can give us, in a sense? Because what Anton is saying to me, seems to me that the events happening in Europe are bigger than the mainstream parties can handle. They can't even fathom, they cannot picture what this really means. And therefore, somehow they're moving towards that right-wing solutions. How did Britain handle it? Just because of the age of the times, that with time somehow the thorn of the problem has been weakened, or what is it?
I should warn you that it's 30 years since I've lived in my own country, so I'm not a great expert anymore on what's happening there. What I am aware, though, as a Briton or an Englishman living in a region of very strong identities, is that I'm always surprised, especially in this last year or two, when I hear people saying that multiculturalism is dead. Multiculturalism hasn't succeeded. The multiculturalism that one sees in Britain when I go back, I'm not saying everything's wonderful there, but I do see Britain as a largely multicultural and a well-functioning multicultural society where people on the whole get on pretty well with each other, where a huge amount of work has been going on to integrate different people who've arrived in different waves of immigration over the years. I remember once taking part in a visit of minority policemen from Britain to Hungary. This was a year after I'd been teasing the Hungarian Ministry of Interior for some time about what percentage of the Hungarian police force is of Roma ethnic background. They would always cite data protection issues to say they weren't even allowed to ask, and then once the woman at the Ministry of Interior rang me to say, "We've found one for you." But of course there are many issues involved in that. So I think, even when Angela Merkel was saying some years ago, multiculturalism is dead in Germany or hasn't worked in Germany, I was surprised. I was relieved with her handling of the refugee crisis last year, because it showed me that she didn't really believe it, or maybe her comments had been taken out of context. But so in terms of, yeah, I think multiculturalism does work, but it's hard work, whether it's happening in Gopčíkovo, because 500 people have arrived there suddenly, and it's difficult to have 500 strangers in your village, or, but integration can happen. The other thing I wanted to say, slightly, coming back to what Anton and the others were talking about there, is about restoring the nation state and about how central the nation state has become in Europe again. I would go further and say that identity nowadays has become central for everyone, not just one's national identity, but the identity, for example, in the United States, the movement Black Lives Matter. Big debates in the United States about stressing the importance, the pride in being black, in being different, in belonging to that. The lesbian and gay movement as well is also about identity politics. And I think, the Hungarians, the Slovaks, the East Europeans are, people who are very fond of expressing that national identity. But if one looks in Budapest each summer, there's something called the Jewish Summer Festival, where Jewish identity is being very stressed, and very few of those posters are ever defaced. So in a time of, I think there is such a thing as positive identity, amid all this talk of fear and of one's identity being threatened, I think the trick would be, or what we would all need to do, is to find ways to express our identities, to have multiple identities ourselves, and to respect other people's identities, not to be aggressive to other people's identities. And as maybe some of the far-right parties that are moving towards the centre hopefully are realising that themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Considering our guests that before they put the headphones on, the floor is open for you guys too. Anyone who wants to ask a question, I think the collective consciousness of this place is very good at asking smart questions, and I don't want to monopolize it for myself. So whoever feels like asking, please do. The microphone would be probably in the hall there. I can't see you properly, so if there's anyone who... you can ask in Slovak too. You don't have to struggle with whatever it is. All right, so before you think, and then we'll come back to you, because I don't see any hands raised yet. Anna, would you want to react to what Nick has said?
Yeah, I would... I'm sorry.
Because this is the question of like, yeah, I saw many like videos, oh, look at Birmingham, this is terrible, this is happening all across UK, multiculturalism doesn't work, but I think we haven't even started in, particularly in Central Europe. Like, we don't even know what the issues of integration and inclusion, regardless of the race or sex, it has not even happened in the country.
Yeah, I would really like to leave out the whole discussion about multiculturalism here, because it's a very, very long discussion. I think that multiculturalism, especially in Central Europe or in Europe, it's not something that is developing. It's already here. There is a reason why Europe is the most divided region in the world, because of so many nations, because of so many identities, and because everybody hates each other. That's why everybody wanted to have their own state. But in the end, it is multiculturalism, and the the Habsburg Empire gave birth to a certain multiculturalism. But identity and developing multiculturalism, still, I think there are plenty of multiculturalisms. We're not talking about one particular pattern that is working all the time. There are different cultures, there are different histories. When, for example, this is, I think, I really hate, when West Europeans start talking about the inherent xenophobia or racism of Central Europe, I really don't understand. Many West European societies, they have this guilt, this post-colonial guilt towards the Asian and African societies that they colonized. But let's talk about Central Europe. What country did Slovakia colonize? What country did Bulgaria colonize? There is a different culture, there is a different history. There is a different history of integration. And again, I'm not being an advocate of either Robert Fico or Viktor Orban here, but when the narrative is proposed that our society is not ready, there is a truth and a lie here. It may be ready, it may develop, because anyway societies develop, they're not closed, they develop anyway. There is a truth here, a grain of truth here, is that, again, Slovaks hate Hungarians, Hungarians hate Slovaks, Romanians hate Hungarians. Obviously I generalize. How can they expect Hungarians or Romanians to like people not even from Europe, even if they hate their neighbors? There is a problem here. And again, what I mentioned, there is a reason why Europe is so divided politically. And of course, I agree with Nick that the idea of identity, has become central. And the identitarian movement, which is a far-right movement, has been developing in France and Belgium, in Austria. Again, they're really not talking about nation, they're talking about an identity. But what I would challenge here is that, yes, we can talk about the positive identity, but at the same time, what is the reason that identity has become so central? It's because identity of people is challenged. So this is a reaction to their own identity being challenged, and that's why it has become so central. I think this is the reason, and this is why it's not that easy to turn a challenged identity into a positive identity, because this is a knee-jerk reaction to a challenge, to some kind of a problem.
And would you, Laszlo, then I would turn to you with Hungary, because for us it was Jobbik situation would have never happened in Slovakia. We were sure that this is like we will be immune to any kind of party coming to the parliament. So what Anton is arguing about the identity challenge, I think he said very rightfully that Germany, having all the guilt from the past and really good education in history, has reacted to a new developments the same way as we did. So that challenge to identity is more economic, that somehow people are losing their dignity, or is it really a challenge of like a global world, coming technology, new people, somehow we feel we don't hold the hands of our country in our hands, that it's foreign monopolies deciding upon us, that's the foreign conglomerates taking our labor and money away. Is that the identity challenge which we are facing, or is it just the national feel of like we are not Hungarians anymore because we serve the Westerners or whoever that is?
First of all, I would add something what Anton told, that yes, we hate all the neighbors. This is the nature of Central Europe, but we love someone who is far away, who is not our neighbor. So it's there is this part as well. So it's probably I was misunderstandable the last occasion when I was joking that the main issues of far right or extreme parties, doesn't matter if it's far left or far right, is corruption and chaos. And this is what I try to emphasize, that somehow at the moment people don't realize that those regimes coming up or just really surfacing and declaring and campaigning with law and order and good structure, efficiency, etc., they are the most corrupt and most chaotic parties. And this is such a paradox, which I don't really understand. And the only thing which came into my mind, it's not the memory, it's the responsibility of the intellectual elite, which didn't explain us what was the real nature of Hitler, what was the real nature of the Soviet Union, what is the real nature of Putin, that we are we are somehow not emphasizing that there is, I think there is no other corrupted country than Russia at the moment, I mean, within the framework of Europe. And coming back to the question of identity, it's for me it's also a paradox that in 24 hours our Prime Minister could shift the quote-unquote natural hatred towards the Russians to a pro-Putin politics. And it's also going to be even more a paradox that Kaczynski is going to do this, I mean, this turn. I think he would. Well, I mean, we could bet. But it's going to be very difficult for him. But I wouldn't be surprised if he tries. And so it's probably the nature, I mean, the hard seed of these turns, of these paradoxes, is, as you told, the identity, looking for identity, which is independent from. So it's in a way it's quite anarchic. This kind of identity what we have in Central Europe, and because we are emphasizing, and you are right, that nationalism as the tool of populism is very important, but at the same time efficiency is also, you know, as a slogan, that efficiency doesn't work in democracy, so to say, simplifying, you know, this kind of idea which illiberal state means. And again, you know, going back to the efficient dictatorship, this is what we don't have in mind. That those dictatorships weren't efficient. Just we have the misleading image that they were, and this is our fault in a way. You know, what kind of historical knowledge or family history we inherited to our children.
Vierka, now it's your turn. Anton nám hovoril, že z jeho pohľadu sa zdá, že tá historická vedomosť alebo nevedomosť nie je jediná príčina toho, lebo v Nemecku ju majú a napriek tomu tie pravicové strany stúpajú, pretože nové skutočnosti sú väčšie ako tá historická nevedomosť, že je tu strach. Na druhej strane aj László hovorí o tom, že že tu máme falošné predstavy o výkonnosti a efektivite diktátorských režimov, lebo máme pocit, že za sociku to bolo všetko lepšie, všetko fungovalo, fungovali kluby, proste všetko išlo. A u nás sa teraz stalo, že dediny, ktoré boli vypálené fašistami, zvolia Kotlebu ako stranu. Čiže historická pamäť, ako keby tie hrubé čiary, čo za každým si nakreslíme, za každým režimom, že hrubá čiara, nebudeme sa tomu venovať, lebo je to príliš bolestivé, ako keby nás teraz dobiehali. A teraz tá cesta von z toho. Tu, ak sa ohovára vždy bratislavská kaviareň, tak je to o tom, že teda Kotlebovci naozaj 15 rokov robili takúto drobnú prácu občianskych aktivistov, pomáhali ľuďom, keď pri záplavách, keď nedostali poštu, tak tam išiel nejaký holohlavý chlapec tú poštu vyzdvihnúť a pomohol. Otázka moja je, že či toto je zase nejaká urbánna legenda, alebo či sa toto naozaj deje a že či teda ten občiansky sektor aj náš slovenský môže s tým nejakým spôsobom pomôcť, lebo ja osobne to cítim, že ľudia strácajú identitu takú tej vlastnej, alebo tú dôstojnosť, že vlastne vedia sa o seba postarať, že vždy, že chýba nám tu taká tá naozajstná sociálna demokracia, ktorá by tým ľuďom dala pocítiť, že vy sami môžete dokázať niečo ako komunita, lebo to, čo vám chodí z tej sociálno-demokratickej strany, je vždy nejaký dar, za ktorý musíte poposkať prsteň pána biskupa alebo pána šéfa. A keď to urobíte, tak zase vám niečo príde, že nie je tam taký ten pocit tej komunity, ktorá sa s tým vie vysporiadať. Je to tak? Cítiš to tak u seba, alebo nie?
Ten problém tej identity tu je ako veľmi ťažký, ktorý teda zaznieva teraz presahovo. A ja si myslím, že to je vážny problém. Ja len poviem taký príklad, že čo teda tu chýba, že mám kamaráta, on je z Uruguaya, kandidoval aj na prezidenta, bol vo väzení, mučili ho, chunta, lavičiar. Ja po komunizme proste, a teraz sme sa stretli na festivale, obidvaja akože hľadajúci identity a teraz snažiaci sa hľadať nejakú víziu tej svojej krajiny. On vyštudoval v Moskve, kde sa postavili dúbkom vlasy a naraz mi on rozprával, čo prežil a proste zrazu naozaj to bolo také, akože sme proste sedeli a hľadali sme, teda išli sme po takých pinzetkov, sme odkrývali tie naše minulosti a hľadali tú identitu toho človeka a že naozaj v tej ktorej krajine, tie presahy nás. A to je strašne zložité, pretože extrémizmus v tej ktorej krajine je naozaj ešte tak špecifický, že my sa dokonca ani nedokážeme nejako akoby... Je to vážne. Ja som bola v Srbsku, v Maďarsku, keď stavali ostnatý drôt Maďari a naraz som si uvedomovala, že aká šialená historická udalosť, že čo sa to deje. Proste naraz som bola s nejakými sírskymi deťmi a očami, alebo teda prosila som tých maďarských vojakov, že sa musia dostať k rodičom, ktorých už nasačkovali do autobusu a že tie deti sa boli vycikať a zrazu som bola za ostnatým drôtom, vy ste boli v Európe, ja som bola mimo tej Európy a v rukách som mala teda pri mne boli dve malé deti zo Sýrie, ktoré už zrejme ani v túto chvíľu nemajú rodičov. A teraz to bolo tak šialené, že ja som tak, kde si, kto si? Si Európan? Teraz už nie si Európan? Čo si myslí tá Európa, kto som, akým vzťahom sa ja teraz, ako sa budem identifikovať, kde som sa ocitla. A ja som sa ocitla v absolútne novej situácii, ktorú sme nikto nečakali. Zo dňa na deň. Tak absurdná situácia, ako keď v 68. prišli tanky a moja babička je z takej maďarskej dediny, ktorá teda ešte hranicou patrila k Slovensku, pri delení. A naraz proste, tak to všetci rozprávali po maďarsky a teraz prišiel 68. a nad ránom tanky. A strýko Mihál počul tank, tak vybehol von a čo zbadal prvé maďarský tank, lebo k nám išli od spodu RVHP maďarské tanky. A on hneď ako teda začal boskávať a čo okolo a tešil sa, že ďakujeme, už ste nás prišli oslobodiť. A teraz vyšla teta, že ty somár, to nie sú naši. To je síce maďarský tank, ale to je RVHP, to sú Rusi. Tí nás prišli okupovať. A teraz taká šialená situácia, on tam sedel ešte hneď išiel do krčmy, lebo to nechápal. Ako sa identifikovať? A teraz sa vrátim zase, že aj táto dnešná situácia je veľmi zmetená. My sme ešte proste koľko vzdelancov, koľko analytikov tu hľadáme. Áno, treba sa identifikovať. Teraz čo tí mladí ľudia? Teraz ešte sme neuchopili toto a naraz sa to tu všetko metie. Niekto im tu rozpráva, že však vlastne tí Rusi sú dobrí. Ešte sme ani nevysvetlili 68. rok, okupáciu, ešte sme ani poriadne nevysvetlili, prečo sa nemá stavať pomník tomu Biľakovi a či je to zradca alebo hrdina. A naraz teraz táto pometenosť a naozaj do toho Zemavek a čo sa deje na Ukrajine, do toho sa stávajú ostnaté droty, my ešte nemáme vyriešené vzťahy s Maďarskom a teraz kde sa identifikovať, kto som? To nehovorím, že tu sa nás už nejakí naši snažia nám vysvetliť, že sme tu mali nejaké kráľovstvo za Veľkej Moravy. Viete, koľko mladých ľudí sa na to chytilo? A teraz im to odkrývajte v tejto zmetenej dobe. Ako toto odkryť? Ako uchopiť túto pometenosť doby? A ako sa my vysporiadame navzájom? My si vravíme, že naozaj teraz je dôležité mať silných a dobrých susedov, veď to je normálne mať lepšieho kamaráta. Ja som tak múdra, jak mám múdreho kamaráta. Ja sa snažím mať múdrych a dobrých kamarátov. To je o tom susedstve. Teraz je tu kopec pometených a neviem ešte akých kamarátov, hlavne Poľsko, Slovensko, Maďarsko, však to bolo aj pred druhou svetovou vojnou, nie? To sa ako keby trošku vracalo. Niekam sa vraciame. A toto sú vážne veci. Toto sú naozaj vážne veci, takže že ja neviem, že ako sa ideme identifikovať, či ako ten Ujo Mihal s tým ruským tankom, čiže zase k tej ruskej čižme, alebo k tej hnedej čižme, alebo zostaneme sami sebou a naraz si povieme dosť. Dosť, ja som slobodný práve v tom, že teraz sa chcem sám ešte vzdelávať, chcem sám navštíviť susedov, rozprávať sa s nimi a poďme hľadať teraz spoločne. Ja si myslím, že my sme sa tu rozprávali o tom, že teraz sa ten nacionalizmus obracia a možno práve v tomto šialenstve treba hľadať nové dialógy. A to je pre mňa obraz, lebo my sme sa ešte neidentifikovali v tej Európe, napríklad ako Slováci. Sme tam, ale sme tam len v tej identifikácii, že sem prichádzajú nejaké fondy a že teda my chceme mať životnú úroveň ako západná Európa. My ešte ani nerozumieme, čo to vlastne je a čo to znamená, po čom sme volali a čo sme chceli. A ak, tak ja som si najskôr študovala zákony, sociálne treba, kvôli možno divadlu v Pasáže. Alebo identifikácia ako taká, že čo je to kultúra pre nás. Je vo vašej krajine v Maďarsku kultúra na chvoste a u vás je kultúra na chvoste. No tak sme rovnako na tom, tak poďme spolu, hľadajme cestu, to je strašne dôležité. A toto sú veci, ktoré my musíme naozaj aj v sebe nájsť a okrem toho, ja si myslím, že každý jeden z nás musí nájsť v sebe odvahu prekročiť svoj tieň aj v tom, že hľadanie iba takých tých povrchných vecí, že naozaj tou životnou úrovňou niečo nepreklenúť. No ale ak sa my nenaplníme, ak sa niekam my sami neposunieme, nebudeme sa identifikovať, niečo neobjavíme nové, tak tú životnú úroveň to bude hrozne krátke, potom nás obalia okolo tých osnatých plotov a naozaj zvíťazí ten nacionalizmus, takéto niečo, čo je momentálne nezdravé. Ja skôr vnímam, že možno toto nás teraz znovu spojí.
Ďakujem pekne, Devi. Ďakujem. Áno, vidím ruky. Nech sa páči.
Dobrý večer, ja bych měl jednu otázku. To sú nezaznalo žádná reflexe toho.
Ale na mikrofón treba povedať, oni to prekladajú.
Aby počuli aj.
Dobrý večer, ja to skúsim česky. Mám takovou otázku, nezazněla vůbec žádná reflexe toho, v jakém stavu jsou dneska média.
Chvíľočku. Asi to skúste ešte raz. Keď nie, tak ja to potom by som to preložil, keby nám to nefungovalo.
Už to jde?
Výborně.
Dobrý večer, tak ještě jednou to zkusím. Chtěl bych se panelistů zeptat, jak vidějí dnešní situaci z toho úhlu pohledu, jak slabá je práce médií a jestli byl k něčemu dobrý systém jako Piano, jak hodnotí, já to nemám jak jinak srovnat, ale za komunistů se mi zdá, že jsme viděli víc, co se děje v Maďarsku, Rakousku, Polsku a kontinuálně, na rozdíl od toho, že dneska se dozvídáme jenom nějaký nesmyslný skandály, které se v těch zemích dějou. Jestli by jako nestálo za to ty média posunout do takového funkčnější roviny, než dneska ji zažíváme.
Nick, would you try that? It's like, I don't know if you caught the question, it was more about like role of the media, that before we learn more from the media about countries neighboring to Slovakia than today, that if you see media playing a major role in defining identity and dealing with the situation.
And the piano system.
Yeah, and the piano system, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like you have to pay for the content. So if you want to read a newspaper article from, let's say, Slovak dailies, you have to pay, a few cents, 20 cents or something, or you can subscribe for a year for 30 euros a year. And that kind of prevents some people from learning more because of I think that's the nature of the question.
I can't really answer on the pay-as-you-go media because I don't, unfortunately, have much experience of that, except with certain British media. In terms of the weakness of the media or our responsibility for what's happening and for perhaps failing to explain what's going on, there's a lot more media than there used to be. And I think largely that's a positive development. I'm talking, of course, about the social media here, and the fact that the social media can be used so effectively for so many things to organise. So the marketplace of opinions is much bigger than it was, and obviously, you know, far-right groups are using that very well, but so are those who, I'm sure Vera would have comments on this, but to organise the most effective political challenge to Viktor Orban so far was when 40, 50, 60,000, mostly young people, went out on the streets and managed to prevent him and his government imposing a tax on the internet. So, you know, there are more important things probably, you know, going on in Hungary than the internet, or it was an interesting challenge. But the weakness of the media, obviously the mainstream media, like mainstream parties, are in crisis. So, but we are challenged every day by you know, individuals, by organisers, by people on Facebook, by people on Twitter, and our articles are also, you know, spread much more widely than they would have been. What I worry about with social media today, rather, maybe this is an answer to a different question, but you know, I'm 56 years old. I've been working in this region for 30 years, and I work for an organisation which prides itself, the BBC, on being objective, of being impartial, of trying at least to do that, regardless of, you know, what one feels personally. And I don't see nowadays much value being placed on even attempting to be objective, of even attempting to be impartial. Everyone has an opinion. The blogging sphere, in social media, no one's trying to be objective on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. Everyone's trying to give their own opinions. And so it's getting noisier and noisier out there, and some of those opinions are pretty extreme, and they can whip up other views. You know, one of the most controversial issues, obviously, recently in Europe were the attacks on women on the 31st of December. The German media were heavily criticised for taking a long time to report the ethnic background of the participants, of the perpetrators of that violence. But as someone who's used to cover Kosovo, and I remember how in a particular incident when the Albanian ethnic background or the Serbian ethnic background of perpetrators of violence, how that spread through the society, and you had huge attacks between different groups. So I think there is a huge responsibility of the media, but also of individuals today.
I'd like to add something that Nick has said. I completely agree that actually, if we're looking at the region and the situation with the media, we can see, I think, two levels of the problems. First problem is what Nick said, is that the mainstream media as such are in crisis. They're in crisis because of many things, and the paywall, this piano system, this is one of the ways to overcome the problem which are internal to the media, and this is the problem with funding. Because who can own the media? Only the rich people. They're maybe not necessarily interested in objective reports, information, so that would be biased. And when people want to do something more or less independent media, they have to introduce paywall. But there is another problem. Of course, I completely agree with Facebook, and I don't think we really understand the damage that the social media have done to our societies. Not yet, but it is underway. What Facebook provides us is with these comfortable, safe zones where we create our own friend list and this timeline, and we read only what we want to read and agree with people. It's like preaching to the converted already, and this creates these closed societies. But at the same time, this is horizontal. The social networks are horizontal mostly, and this puts objective information on the same level as some mad conspiracy theory, which would have the same coverage on Facebook or on the social media. It may even have the same impact. If in the 90s there were all those weird, and in the beginning of the noughties there were all those weird websites with very bad design, talking about chemtrails and I don't know, reptilians and whatever. It's now mainstream. It's now on the RT, for example. Well, not really the reptilians, but something else. But still, the promulgation of conspiracy theories is so diverse and so huge now that it does create this problem for the mainstream media. But there is another problem, which are domestic problems. I'm not a particular expert on the media in Slovakia, but I know that Prime Minister Robert Fico just sometimes does not answer the questions of particular journalists, and which creates problems for this newspaper or a magazine. But this is a domestic problem. In Hungary, there is authority, the media authority, and there are those huge fines for the media which are believed to underreport or report badly, and those people loyal to Fidesz would decide whether that was okay or not okay. In Romania, for example, there is another problem in Romania because they were quite okay with until the financial crisis of 2008, and many media were owned by multinationals, and that was quite good for the Romanian media landscape because that created a place for investigative research and also for some more or less independent research. But after the 2008, many multinationals just left the country, and the media were bought up by local oligarchs, who of course wanted to push their own political agenda. So there is another problem. And I'm very often hear another problem which is connected to this transition process. Before the post-socialist countries joined the EU, they had funds for the development of the media, for the development of the NGOs. What happened after the country joined the EU? All those funds were cut. And those societies were not really prepared. They had money when they developed. Then suddenly everybody said, well, you're not developed. You're in a normal country. But no, you still have to invest heavily in the work of the NGOs and in the work of the free media.
László, you were at the forefront of Samizdat in Hungary with the propagation of social media. I think one could argue, well, this is much easier now to produce like independent, reliable source, because in the Samizdat dates we all read the books undercover, you know, secretly and all that. So somehow you have the source to rely on, and you felt this is checked, cross-checked, and that's a reliable source. Do you believe that we can still create that kind of sense of independent journalism or independent knowledge like in the old days?
I think I'm not exaggerating if I'm telling that everyone who was active in changing these regimes in Eastern Europe, we believe very much in institutions. And even I would say that there is this relevant word of Velvet Revolution, but we can as well call it institutionalized revolution, because this was the main goal to implement those institutions which are the cornerstones of democracy. And this lesson had been learned very well by Fidesz. So they knew exactly what to attack first. And so, little bit broader than the media is those cornerstones of defending the democracy. Those are under attack by those parties, those political regimes, those governments who want to realize that a liberal state, or by my friend Bálint Magyar, who calls it simply as such a mafia state. We can talk later on. It just came out in at Columbia University Press, that book, which realizes that that this forced solidarity, what we could call nationalism, or as well we could call Cosa Nostra, is the same nature. It's just a false solidarity. It's nothing else. It's not even populism. It's just a false solidarity, which is again replacing a lack. But anyway, getting back to institutions. So we were really very keen on, and I think probably we were wrong that the institutions automatically defending the democracy. And one of course, we have the constitutional courts and independence, etc., etc., etc. But regarding the media, and so those institutions around the media trying to defend the independence of the media and the multifoldedness of the media, these are which were completely ruined in Hungary, and this is which are getting to be ruined in Poland. We already know. Replacing it replacing it with samizdat is that I think it's a time travel back. So I don't believe, you know, in this partisan actions anymore, because I think we are over it, and we have to bring back the institutionalized world, which defends not only media but other things as well.
Thank you. Martin, nech sa páči. Dobrý deň. Okay, nech sa páči.
Ja by som sa chcel opýtať v podstate na záležitosť teda s utečencami. Viktor Orbán napríklad veľmi zradikalizoval, čo sa týka problematiku utečencov. Ja mám dojem, že napríklad na tom námestí v Budapešti jednoducho nechal tak dlho, nech sa zradikalizujú sami, ešte možno by im tam doniesol aj nejaké molotovy, keby mohol. Ale uvedomujú si, Robert Fico sa znovu priživil na tejto téme, ale uvedomujú si títo štátnici, v úvodzovkách by som povedal, že ten prílev utečencov v blízkej budúcnosti v podstate nie je možné zastaviť. Nie takými metódami, a keď tieto krajiny sa hlásia k nejakým európskym hodnotám, určite nejakými koncentračnými tábormi, ako to teraz prezentujú nástupom policajtov a tak ďalej, ale že bude naozaj aj tu potrebné v blízkej budúcnosti naozaj riešiť integráciu týchto ľudí. My tu za 20 rokov alebo 50 rokov sme nepohli s integráciou Rómov. Myslíte si, že sme schopní niečoho takého, lebo naozaj to bude problém? Ďakujem. Zatiaľ naozaj je tu len vybičovaný nacionalizmus, ale reálne riešenia tu nie sú. Podľa mňa teda. Ďakujem.
Zoberiem ešte jednu otázku. Môžem poprosiť ten mikrofón dopredu, ak budete taký dobrý, alebo ešte takto nabok. Neviem, ak máte vedľa seba niekoho, kto chce.
Vďaka. Dobrý deň, ja by som sa ešte trošku vrátil, alebo predsunul si tú otázku. Ja sa chcem spýtať, že či si nemyslíte, že je problém v korektnosti toho mainstreamu a v jazykovej to kultivovanosti, lebo naopak tie konšpiračné plátky, ktoré sa dnes už stávajú štandardom, tak používajú tú emočnú fázu, také v podstate ten blúd, ten je oveľa to chytlavejšie, jednoduchý, funguje to niečo ako rozprávka alebo nejaký horor, odkrývame tajomstvo, niečo sa dozvieme a je to nejakým spôsobom to vábivé. A plus do toho tá emočná vrstva, či nie je tam problém, či by sa nejakým spôsobom nemal, a teraz poviem expresívne a v úvodzovkách trochu zbulvárniť alebo zhrubnúť a používať taký istý jazyk nejakouto formou, ako to Orwell nazval tým newspeakom, alebo že či to nie je lepšie priblížiť sa až do bulvárnej, primitívnej formy, lebo ten mainstreamové aj tie slušné plátky, ja si myslím, že napríklad taký denník N, to môžem povedať, tak je dobrý počín až undergroundový v tej dobrej fáze, akože kvalitne, ale používa ťažší jazyk, analytický jazyk a je problém sa prepracovať také cez tie články, kdežto bulvár alebo konšpiračné médiá dávajú skratkovité riešenia a rýchle a takto je to. Postradajú tú analytickú formu.
Ďakujem pekne. Môžem dopredu poprosiť ešte mikrofón, tu máme jednu otázku vpredu.
Thank you. I will have an English the question. I mean, but it's a different one, so it's up to you whether you have time to answer. I mean, when we look at Hungary and Poland and Slovakia, it's fascinating that the Marian Kotleba is the only one who, we had been talking about the memory. So he's the only one who works with memory, although we forgot it, but he works with a narrative of the fascist state. He's referring to that in his extremist policy. But sorry?
Your big thing to say.
No, well, yes, but so if you look at that in Slovakia, you have no other political party which refers to any kind of past. So but in Hungary and in Poland, there is already something like a historical politics. They refer to the past, all of them somehow. Kaczynski and Orbán as well. So my question is, does this historical narrative, which is used in Hungary by Orbán or Jobbik or by Kaczynski in Poland, does that help to rise the extremism? Is it the tool of that, or it's just something which is not dangerous?
Thank you. Whoever from the panelists would like to take up on this. Okay.
Let me briefly comment on the two first questions. I think they're related in a way that there is a famous saying, at least in our field of research of this right-wing studies into right-wing extremism, is that right-wing extremists, they ask the right questions. The problem is that they provide wrong answers. And why this saying is so popular is because, and this is where I'm getting back to what I said, the rise of the right-wing extremism is not because they're so strong, it's because the center is so weak, because the center-right and center-left parties fail to deliver. They fail to deliver for many reasons. One of the reasons, I think, and probably this is one of the principal reasons that underlies this whole problem is the philosophical reason. Many parties on the center-left and on the center-right believed that making societies prosperous, making economies thriving, making political stability necessarily leads to a long-term, basically the end of history. So nothing wrong can happen to that society. And new challenges will be just forgotten and just discarded. They will not be problems. It turned out that people still need, going back to the identity discussion, they still need identity. They still need to feel themselves, feel themselves part of the society, and they want to know what are the philosophical grounds of that society, the culture, and etc., the religion, culture, philosophy. And this is where those technocratic mainstream parties really fail to deliver. And political correctness, this is something that we can discuss, this political correct language. It can cut both ways. Yes, on the one hand, political correctness just made a taboo many problematic issues that societies are challenged with, but at the same time, political correctness does defend and does protect particular minorities from abuse. So we cannot say political correctness is bad or is good. It's just a tool that it's like a knife. It can cut and bread and it can kill at the same time. But I want to underline here is that, again, yes, the center-left and the center-right basically failed in many countries to deliver. And this is the primary reason why the far right and far left are rising in some societies. And the last point I want to make. This failure of the mainstream parties created a condition, an environment where illiberalism or extremism becomes the only viable alternative to liberal politicians who just failed. Not in many societies, it just happens that way, that a viable or a relevant liberal opposition just, it may be very weak, it can be disunited, and the only viable opposition to the failed liberal politics is just the liberal one. And people would go for it. And something that I think Laszlo, they are mentioned earlier today, is that radicalism, maybe not mentioned, but I started thinking about this, radicalism and extremism, and especially in the right-wing direction, now becomes a new counterculture at the same time. Many young people would go for that extremism because it challenges the mainstream. There's also a generational problem. If their parents are associated so closely with the spirit of 1989, the counterculture to that would be right-wing extremism. If earlier left-wing extremism was the counterculture, but now we are in a different situation where right-wing extremism becomes a counterculture. And it's also this, we need to understand that a neo-Nazi skinhead is probably now the today's punk that was in the 1970s, in the 1980s in Germany and in Britain. But now it may be a Nazi skinhead.
Trošku z takej vlastnej skúsenosti, informovanie pravdivé. Ja som si to nalistovala, preto som tak chvíľočku nepočúvala, lebo neviem s týmto pracovať a neuvidíte to, lebo som to zle nalistovala, ale je to Bystrický samosprávny kraj. Sú to noviny, ktoré vydáva Marian Kotleba. Sú zrozumiteľné, jasné, nezahmlievajú. Chcem to porovnať s jedným príkladom. V Bystrici pracujeme ako Banskobystrická alternatíva, skupina teraz 9 poslancov, ktorá sme chceli pravdivo informovať, keďže sme antikorupční aktivisti, na akom princípe sa v meste kradne, ako sa hlasuje, ako poslanci zavádzajú, ako sa nenastavujú dobré zákony, alebo teda VZDNka. Tak sme napísali taký občasník, strašne dlho sme na tom pracovali, aby tomu rozumel každý občan. Tak sme to dali tam, že ako sa okradlo mesto o 270 miliónov korún, vtedy ešte, a vysvetľovali sme to. Nebolo to zrozumiteľné. Nikto nám nerozumel. Proste nebol to asi slovník, do ktorého by sa ľudia boli dostali, že teda tým hlasovaním a že máte si to čítať, a kto ako hlasoval, prečo tak hlasovala, čo tomu predchádzalo. Marian Kotleba informuje kraj. Neviem, či si to viete predstaviť, ale sú šialené noviny, veľmi jednoduché, majú veľmi jasné odkazy, sú jednoducho premyslené, ktoré povedia všetkým ľuďom to, čo si myslia, že je absolútne čistou, necenzurovanou pravdou. A nie sú to žiadne konšpirácie, nezavádza, nepoužíva nejaké ťažké slovné zvraty. Je to veľmi jednoduché. Na jednej strane sa dozviete, že predseda Banskobystrického kraja, keď nám vláda nepomáha, nech nám aspoň nepoškodí. Oslobodíme kraj z dlhového otroctva. Vláda zobrala kraju milióny. Potom odstavíme škodlivých parazitov, potom utečencov tu nechceme. A ďalšia strana je, už to tu neviem otvoriť, ďalšia strana je, akú kultúru majú ľudia v kraji mať radi, teda folklór, biela mis na školách, a teda, že žiadne nejaké komplikované divadelné predstavenie, umelci sú paraziti, dekadentní a hnidí a neviem čo, to všetko sa tí ľudia tam dozvedia. Tento plátok je veľmi jednoduchý, jasne, zrozumiteľne naformulovaný, je veľmi dobre vymyslený vytlačia sa 260 000 kusov a dostane sa do každej domácnosti v Banskobystrickom regióne. Ak si zoberiete teraz, predstavme si, že som pracovala s stredoškolákmi v Veľkom Krtiši, niekoľko z nich nebolo v živote v Bratislave. Ľudia, ktorí idú k maturitám, nevedeli si predstaviť, ako vyzerá Bratislava. Rozprávali mi, to tí v Bratislave, to ani kaviarensky, to je veľmi komplikované a zložité, ale proste rozprávali mi tie decká, že to len ľudia v Bratislave si myslia, že ako my žijeme. My žijeme takto. A teraz sa mu dostane tomuto človeku, aj tomu chálanovi, ktorý sa naozaj nemal za aké peniaze dostať, aby sa pozrel na Bratislavský hrad, aby videl električku naživo, sa mu dostane tento plátok. 260 000 kusov. Marian Kotleba má naozaj veľmi dobrú partiu aktivistov, ktorí mu to poctivo roznesú od schránky ku schránke. Teta v Polomke si prečíta veľmi jasný odkaz, ako sa doteraz na kultúru vyhadzovali neskutočné peniaze, teraz to Marian napraví. Bude taká kultúra, ktorá sa dostane do každého kultúrneho domu. Každé dieťa bude vzdelané, keď sa nedostane dieťa na strednú, pekne pôjde na učňovku, lebo on sa už o každého učňa postará. A teraz sa snažím hovoriť jeho jazykom. Je to veľmi komplikované a pre mňa veľmi zložité. Ale tí ľudia tomu rozumejú. Sú informovaní veľmi pravdivo, žiadne denníky N, žiadne, ako oni sa smejú, že už ani nové časy nečítajú, lebo aj tam ich zavádzajú a klamú. To je sprostosť v novom čase, mi vraveli. Pani Vierka, nové časy, taká sprostosť, to nám všetko teraz pán župan vysvetlil. Neviem. My sme roky pracovali na tom v Banskej Bystrici, ako informovať cez plátok ľudí, že nás títo politici zavádzajú a klamú, ako majú ľudia uvažovať, ako ich občiansky angažovať, ako sa každý jeden z nás musí naozaj občiansky angažovať, pretože tento štát sú naše dane. To nie je tak, ako mi povedala teta na Hore Hroní, že Fico kradne zo štátneho, to nech si kradne, kým neokráda nás. A teraz vy zrazu si uvedomíte, že vy musíte teda ísť zase od A po Z vysvetľovať ľuďom, a na to sa zase teta postaví na mňa. Ona povie, mne to nehovorte, my to už máme vysvetlené. Neviem. Hľadám to. Učím sa. Je to naozaj zrazu ťažká empatia vžiť sa do situácie ľudí skutočne v tom danom regióne, v tom danom meste. A to už ani nevravím, že som im chcela pôvodne vysvetľovať napríklad na tom jednom stretnutí, prečo treba rešpektovať a príjmať utečencov a úplne im vnímať tú situáciu. Ani sme sa k tomu nedostali. Takže to je len do placu. Ja to len hádzam do placu, aj do tejto debaty nechcela som nejak, ale toto je fakt. A teraz tie plátky už vyšli druhé vydanie. No a ešte k tomu prichádza taký ďalší, to som si teraz hodila zle, nevadí. Veľmi jednoduché, to je proste informačný denník, pravdivo informačný denník pre vás, pre všetkých. A oni sa teraz už vedia, kde sa majú informovať. Bude sa to šíriť po celom Slovensku, tieto plátky dostanú, nebojte sa, teraz už budú v každej domácnosti.
Môžem dostať mikrofón? Áno, nech sa páči. Nemám ho ja. Ten už bude len krátko, lebo trošku preťahujeme čas, tak môžem poprosiť. O tom, čo ste neskôr začali, ja to skrátim. Ďakujem. Volám sa Pavel Ondrčka, rodený Prešpurák, Bratislavčan. Ja som zažil i súd TISu, i ostatných pohlavárov, takže si túto dobu veľmi dobre pamätám. Samozrejme, že ma nepotešili výsledky týchto volieb a hlavne nie víťazstvo Kotlebu v tom regióne, ale vlastne má tu zásah
aj do celého Slovenska. Som povďačný pani Dubačovej, že nás tak informovala, nás, Bratislavčanov, ako to vlastne na tom strednom Slovensku je. Pretože ja si dobre pamätám ako mladý chalan, keď som drukoval Slovenskému národnému povstaniu a naraz teraz vidím, že práve to ohnisko Slovenského národného povstania naraz je tu. Pani Dubačová veľmi dobre vystihla tie dve príčiny, ako jedna domáca rodinná výchova, alebo teda zaostávanie tejto výchovy rodinnej a na druhej strane zaostávanie školského systému. Ako vysokoškolský profesor môžem povedať, že som bol zhrozený, keď som v neformálnych diskusiách so študentami, s vysokoškolákmi rozprával o slovenskom štáte, no tak na 80% neboli informovaní. Mohol by som tomto pokračovať, ale keďže som bol vyzvaný, že mám hovoriť krátko vzhľadom na plánovanú prestávku, dovolím si odvolať sa na slova pani Dubačovej, ktorá začínala svojou nedôslednosťou, teda nie svojou, ale našou nedôslednosťou. Žiaľ, musím vám povedať, a za to sa ospravedlňujem, do určitej miery ste boli nedôsledná i vy. Veľmi krásne ste povedali tú príčinu rodinnú, tú príčinu toho vzdelávacieho procesu napriek tomu a tá cirkev, tá zostala niekde v ústraní. Bojíme sa povedať, že práve katolícka cirkev dnes by mala čo najviac teda hovoriť a najviac a rázne povedať svojim veriacim. Ale nedivím sa, veď si nedokázala obhájiť Bezáka, provokatívne neprišla na pohreb ďalšieho pána, to si pamätáme. Takže toľko asi. Ja vidím našu úlohu dnes tlačiť na cirkev. A nie len tým, že by už malo konečne dojsť odluky cirkvi od štátu, ale hlavne tlačiť, a veriaci by mali tlačiť, aby mali pravdivé informácie a aby katolícki kňazi nerobili to, čo dokonca robia dnes, že si obhajujú Kotlebu. Ďakujem a prepáčte, že som vás ukrátil prestávku.
Ďakujem vám pekne.
Ja by som poprosil ešte, I would like to ask you, Laszlo and Nick, for some concluding remarks, because otherwise we will just run a little too far. The three questions, I don't know if you still remember, but go ahead.
Let's see that, I mean, up to now we were talking about what are the tools of the extreme right wing. Let's see what they provide, because they provide something. And two very important elements, community and solidarity. And these are very basic things which probably there were really a lack after the political changes in the 90s, and these parties felt very well that these are the lacks, but they can replace. The other thing is what I wanted to add, что делать, as the famous Russian saying. And as a conclusion, what I do as an architect, I designed mobile laundry for the refugees. While designing, I realized that we have again very wrong picture on those refugees. They are absolutely exceptional. They are constantly on run. They are constantly on move. So it's not like in Sudan or the Palestinians or other refugees what we had in the last decades. This is a completely new phenomenon. And without getting into details, designing, okay, let's start again. There is probably nothing worse than put up your dirty clothes after having a shower and having a coffee. This is awful. And And those people who are a constant move, this is the thing what they sacrifice, that they don't wash. And if you remember the pictures of those refugees, except very small, because they move. And so we designed a mobile laundry which moves with them along the path. And I think I'm not exaggerating if it was as complicated as, I don't know, landing on the moon to design the vehicle, because independent from energy, water supply, you know, someone has half a kilogram of dirty clothes, what he or she wants to wash, so you need to collect 5, 6, whatever families to, etc., etc., etc. You know, it's the runtime of a washing, everyone knows, you know, of those washing machines, you know, it's 1.5 hours, and it has to be very simple, so anyone could handle it and push the buttons, etc. And of course, it's given to civic society, to civil organizations, to NGOs, because you don't want to incorporate military units, etc., which have all this. So, this is what I designed. This is what I did in the last couple of months, and they are on 4 units are moving all along, you know, from Greece to Austria.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's several quite wide-reaching points that it's hard to kind of sum up, but the gentleman who said that how can we integrate the refugees into our European societies when we can't integrate the Roma. I think what the politics of intolerance across Europe today, whether it's from centre-right parties or far-right parties, or even from some liberal or social democratic politicians who say we cannot cope with the challenges of the refugees, or for that matter that we cannot cope with the challenges of groups within our society that are less integrated, like the Roma. I mean, it's all about the other, the stranger. And to round that up with what the gentleman was saying about what the Christian church can be, and in some cases is preaching today, or could be preaching today. This afternoon I had a couple of hours in Bratislava and went into St. Martin's Church, and there's a magnificent sculpture in the corner of St. Martin, obviously cutting his coat in half to give to the beggar at his feet. If we speak about Christian Europe, I think there are plenty of very good examples of Christian Europe, or whatever we call this Europe, of the generosity that we've seen towards the refugees, towards the other in our midst, towards the poor in our own societies. And I don't think we need to look any further for a positive message.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left, so I would like to thank Nick Thorpe, Laszlo Rajk, Anton Šechovcov a veľmi pekne ďakujem Vierka Dubačová za to, že ste k nám prišli všetci spolu. Round of applause from you. Potom by som poprosil, kto má záujem o čítanie od Antona Šechovcova, jeho brúža In the Transition Reversible, nájdete na ľavej strane. O 5 minút začíname novú debatu. Ešte raz veľmi pekne ďakujem za vašu trpezlivosť a poprosím o potlesk pre našich pánov.